My name is Arnold, 32 years old, and I never imagined my own family would steal my apartment. After 3 years of making this place my sanctuary, I left for a 3-week European vacation, my first real break in years. When I returned, exhausted but happy, I found my key wouldn't work. My sister had moved in, and my apartment had been completely renovated without my permission. My parents actually thought they could just take my property and give it away. Now they're learning what property laws really mean. Before I dive into this nightmare, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had family members who thought your boundaries didn't matter. I've always been the responsible one in my family. After graduating with a computer science degree, I landed a job as a software developer at Tech Fusion, a growing company in Seattle. For years, I lived frugally in a tiny studio apartment, taking on extra projects and saving every penny I could. My dream was to own my own place, something that was completely mine. 3 years ago, that dream finally came true when I purchased my 2-bedroom apartment in the Westlake neighborhood. It wasn't huge or fancy, but it had hardwood floors, large windows with a partial view of the city skyline, and most importantly, it was mine. I spent weekends painting the walls, finding perfect furniture pieces, and slowly turning it into a home that reflected who I was. My grandfather had passed away the year before I bought the place, leaving me some family heirlooms, his vintage record collection, an antique desk where he wrote letters to my grandmother during the war, and a handcrafted chess set. These treasures found their perfect spots in my apartment. My relationship with my family has always been complicated. My parents, Harold and Diana, raised us in a middle-class suburb about an hour outside the city. Growing up, it became clear early on that my younger sister Megan was the favorite. While they attended every one of her dance recitals and softball games, they rarely made it to my academic competitions or chess tournaments. Their explanation was always that Megan needs more encouragement, or, "You're fine on your own, Arnold." This pattern continued into adulthood. When Megan dropped out of college after changing her major 3 times, my parents paid for her apartment. When she totaled her car, they bought her a new one. Meanwhile, I worked through college, took out loans, and built my career through persistence and late nights. I didn't resent helping my sister occasionally, but over time, it became an expectation rather than appreciation. Last Christmas, Megan announced she'd quit her job to find herself, and my parents immediately looked at me, suggesting I could help out by covering her rent for a few months. When I hesitated, the guilt trip began how family supports each other, how I was doing so well while Megan was still figuring things out. I ended up sending her money for 3 months, money I'd been saving for new kitchen appliances. By spring of this year, I was burning out. 5 years at my company, with only occasional long weekends off, had taken their toll. My friend Derek, who'd moved to Europe for work, had been inviting me to visit for years. With a substantial bonus after completing a major project, I finally decided to take a real vacation 3 weeks exploring Italy, France, and Germany. The planning process was exciting and therapeutic. I researched hotels with character instead of chain hotels, found local food tours rather than tourist traps, and mapped out a path through historic sites and museums I'd always wanted to see. I requested the time off 3 months in advance, tied up loose ends at work, and prepared my apartment for my absence. My neighbor Travis, a flight attendant who lived across the hall, agreed to water my plants and collect my mail while I was away. I gave him a spare key and showed him how to care for my finicky fiddle-leaf fig tree. I explicitly told him that no one else was authorized to enter my apartment, not friends, not family, not maintenance, unless there was an emergency. Travis assured me everything would be fine. I didn't tell my family much about my trip. Our communication had become somewhat strained after the Christmas incident, limited mostly to obligatory birthday calls and occasional family dinners. When I mentioned I'd be traveling, my mother seemed distracted, my father grunted acknowledgement, and Megan made a comment about how nice it must be to afford fancy trips. I didn't bother sharing my itinerary or contact information beyond a casual "I'll be in Europe for a few weeks in May." On May 12th, I boarded my flight to Rome, with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. The moment the plane took off, I made a decision this would be a trip about disconnection and presence. I would check email only every 3 days, limit social media to posting occasional photos, and focus on experiencing each moment. The vacation was everything I'd hoped for, and more. I wandered through Roman ruins in the golden hour light, savored wine in tiny Tuscan villages, stood awestruck before Renaissance masterpieces in Florence, cruised down the Seine at sunset in Paris, and hiked through the Black Forest in Germany. I stayed in charming bed and breakfasts where the owners shared local stories over homemade breakfasts. During my trip, I received a few texts from Travis, confirming all was well at home. "Plants are happy," he wrote once. "Mail collected. Nothing important," he noted another time. I found it slightly odd that I hadn't heard anything from my family, not even my mother's usual random texts, asking technology questions, but I chalked it up to my irregular phone usage and time zone differences. If anything, the silence was refreshing. As the trip neared its end, I felt both fulfilled by the experience and ready to return home. I missed my comfortable bed, my morning routine of coffee on my small balcony, and the sense of peace my space gave me. On my last night in Munich, I packed carefully, making room for the few souvenirs I'd purchased: a small watercolor of the Colosseum, hand-blown glass from a Venetian workshop, and a vintage camera I'd found in a Parisian flea market. The return flight was long but uneventful. I dozed, watched movies, and daydreamed about the upcoming weekend, when I would unpack, do laundry, and ease back into my normal life. Little did I know, normal had been completely redefined in my absence. After a 10-hour flight followed by an unexpected 2-hour delay on the tarmac due to thunderstorms, I was beyond exhausted when we finally landed in Seattle. It was nearly midnight local time, which felt like 9 in the morning to my jet-lagged body. All I wanted was a hot shower and my own bed. The cab ride from the airport to my apartment building took 40 minutes through light rain. I watched the familiar city lights blur through the water-streaked windows, feeling that unique combination of travel satisfaction and homecoming comfort. The driver helped me with my luggage, and I tipped him generously before turning toward my building's entrance. That's when I noticed the first strange detail: a silver Volkswagen Jetta was parked in my assigned spot in the building's small parking area. In 3 years, no one had ever parked there. The building management was strict about assigned parking. Irritated but too tired to deal with it, I made a mental note to contact management in the morning. As I approached the building, I glanced up at my third-floor windows and froze. The simple gray curtains I'd installed had been replaced with floral-patterned ones with what appeared to be a valance. I blinked hard, wondering if exhaustion was causing me to hallucinate. But no, those were definitely not my curtains. My heart began to race as I entered the building and took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The familiar corridor looked the same, but as I approached my door, the welcome mat, a simple black one I'd had for years, had been replaced with a colorful one that said, "Home Sweet Home," in cursive script. With trembling hands, I inserted my key into the lock, but it wouldn't turn. I tried again, jiggling it slightly, thinking it might be stiff after weeks of disuse. Nothing. The key that had worked perfectly for 3 years now seemed completely wrong for the lock. Confusion gave way to panic. I knocked on the door, softly at first, then more insistently. After what felt like an eternity, I heard movement inside my apartment, and the door opened. Standing there, in pajama pants and a tank top, was my sister Megan. "Oh, hey Arnold, you're back," she said casually, as if there was nothing unusual about her answering my door. "How was Europe?" I stood there, luggage at my sides, mouth literally hanging open. "Megan? What? Why? How are you in my apartment, and why doesn't my key work?" She stepped back, gesturing for me to enter. "Come in. You look exhausted. We can talk inside." I stepped into what should have been my apartment, but instead entered what felt like an alternate reality. The space was technically the same. Same layout, same windows, same floors, but everything else had changed. My minimalist, mid-century modern furniture had vanished. In its place were overstuffed floral sofas, ornate lamps with tasseled shades, and walls that had been repainted from my carefully chosen slate blue to a bright, almost neon teal. Where my grandfather's antique desk had stood in the corner of the living room, there was now a makeup vanity covered with cosmetics and hair products. The wall that had displayed my collection of black and white photography now featured an arrangement of inspirational quote signs in varying fonts. My entertainment center, with its organized collection of vinyl records and books, had been replaced by a large TV mounted on the wall above a cabinet, filled with fashion magazines and romantic comedies. What? What happened to my things? I managed to ask, my voice barely audible. Megan flopped onto the floral sofa, her sofa, not mine, and smiled. Mom and Dad helped me move in while you were gone. Isn't it great? They thought it would be the perfect solution. Solution to what? I asked, still standing in what used to be my living room, unable to process what I was seeing. Well, you know Jackson and I broke up, and I couldn't afford to keep our apartment since he moved out. Mom and Dad knew you had this whole place to yourself, and since you're doing so well financially, they thought it made sense for me to take it over. The casual way she said this, as if they'd borrowed a sweater rather than stolen my home, made me dizzy with disbelief. Megan, this is my apartment. I own it. I paid for it. Where are my belongings? What happened to my furniture? My grandfather's desk? My records? She waved her hand dismissively. Don't worry, they put everything in storage. Unit 17, at Safe Keep Storage, on Rainier Avenue. They paid for 3 months, so you'd have time to figure out what you want to keep. The numbness I'd been feeling began to give way to anger. Figure out what I want to keep? These are my possessions, in my apartment. You can't just move in and redecorate without my permission. Megan's expression changed from casual to defensive. Look, Mom and Dad said this was the plan. They had the locks changed so I'd be safe since, you gave keys to your neighbor. They handled everything, the moving company, the painters, the new furniture. I just did what they told me to. I ran my hands through my hair, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what had happened. I need to talk to Mom and Dad. Now. Megan shrugged. It's after midnight. They're asleep. You can call them tomorrow. No, I said, pulling out my phone. They need to explain this right now. I called my father's cell phone, and to my surprise, he answered on the third ring. His voice was groggy with sleep. Arnold? What's wrong? It's the middle of the night. What's wrong? I nearly shouted. I just got home from vacation to find you've given my apartment to Megan, moved all my belongings to storage, and changed my locks. That's what's wrong. There was a pause. Some muffled conversation with my mother then. Look, son, we can discuss this tomorrow when everyone's had some sleep. It's not a big deal. Come for lunch around 1, and we'll explain everything. Not a big deal? You stole my home. Don't be so dramatic, he sighed. We'll talk tomorrow. And he hung up. I stared at my phone in disbelief, then looked back at Megan, who was now examining her nails, as if this whole situation was merely an inconvenience. Where am I supposed to sleep tonight? I asked. She glanced around. I've only set up the master bedroom for myself. The second bedroom is full of my craft supplies and workout equipment. There's a Holiday Inn about 2 miles away. And just like that, I was effectively homeless, standing in my own apartment, being told to go find a hotel. The next day, after a restless night in a generic hotel room, I arrived at my parents' suburban home precisely at 1 o'clock. My mother answered the door with her usual cheek kiss greeting, acting as if this was just a normal Sunday lunch visit. Arnold, sweetheart. Come in, come in. How was Europe? Did you try those little pastries I told you about? What were they called, Harold? She called to my father, who was setting the dining room table, as if this was a pleasant family gathering rather than an emergency meeting about their theft of my property. Croissants, Diana, my father replied, not looking up from his precise arrangement of forks. No, not croissants. The other ones. Oh, never mind. Come sit down, Arnold. I made your favorite pot roast with those little red potatoes you like. I remained standing in the entryway. I didn't come here for lunch. I came for an explanation about why you gave away my apartment. My mother's smile faltered slightly, but didn't disappear. Let's not discuss unpleasant things on an empty stomach. Come eat first, then we can talk. Recognizing this as her classic deflection tactic, I reluctantly followed her to the dining room. Megan was already seated, scrolling through her phone, looking completely unbothered by the situation. My father finished setting the table and took his seat at the head, immediately serving himself salad. We ate in uncomfortable silence for several minutes before I put down my fork. I need answers. Now. My father sighed as if I was being difficult. Look, Arnold, the situation is simple. Megan needed a place to stay after Jackson left her high and dry. That 2-bedroom apartment was far more space than you needed for just yourself. It made logical sense. Logical? There's nothing logical about giving away someone else's home without their knowledge or permission. My mother reached over to pat my hand. Sweetheart, we knew you'd be upset initially, but we thought once you understood Megan's situation, you'd see it was the right thing to do. After that horrible breakup, I couldn't stay in the apartment Jackson and I shared, Megan added, her voice taking on the wounded tone she'd perfected since childhood. Every corner had memories. But why my apartment? I demanded. Why not help her find a new place of her own? You're always so successful, Arnold, my mother said with a smile that felt patronizing. You have a great job, savings, connections. You can easily find another place. Megan needs the stability right now. She's in a fragile emotional state. My father nodded in agreement. It's just an apartment. You can afford another one. Your sister can't. Just an apartment? I echoed in disbelief. I saved for years to buy that place. I have a mortgage. I own it. And family helps family, my mother interjected. Remember who paid for your braces in 8th grade? Who drove you to all those chess club meetings? Who helped with your college applications? I stared at her, astonished by the comparison. Are you seriously equating basic parental responsibilities with stealing my home? We didn't steal anything, my father said firmly. We simply redistributed family resources to the person who needed them most at this time. Without asking me, without my permission. I was trying to remain calm, but my voice was rising. My mother looked confused. But we did mention it to you. No, you absolutely did not. I'm sure we did, she insisted. Remember when we were discussing Megan's situation at Easter? We talked about housing options. We discussed Megan looking for a new apartment. There was never any mention of her taking mine. Well, perhaps you weren't listening carefully, my father suggested. You've always been so wrapped up in your own world. The gaslighting was so blatant, it left me momentarily speechless. My mother took advantage of my silence. Arnold, don't you think you're being a bit selfish here? Your sister is going through a terrible time. Her heart is broken, she lost her home, and now her own brother won't help her? I would have helped her. I could have loaned her money for a security deposit, helped her apartment hunt, even let her stay with me temporarily. But you didn't ask, you took. My father's expression hardened. After everything we've done for you, we remortgaged this house to help with your education, and this is the thanks we get? Throwing a tantrum when your sister needs help? A tantrum? You stole my home and my possessions. Nothing was stolen, my mother insisted. Everything is in storage. And really, Arnold, some of your furniture wasn't even that nice. Megan needed a fresh start with a properly decorated place. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So not only did you take my apartment, but you're also insulting my taste? Megan finally looked up from her phone. Those gray curtains were really depressing, Arnold. And that old desk took up so much space that could be better used. That old desk was grandfather's. It's a family heirloom. Well, now it's safely in storage, my mother said soothingly. Nothing lost. My father leaned forward. Look, son, what's done is done. The apartment has been redecorated, Megan has moved in, and frankly, I think this arrangement makes more sense. You're hardly ever home anyway with how much you work. It was a waste of a good apartment. I stood up abruptly. A waste? It's my home. My name is on the deed and the mortgage. You had absolutely no right to do any of this. There's no need for that tone, my mother scolded. We're just trying to help the family. By stealing from one family member to give to another? It's not stealing when it's family, my father stated with absolute conviction. You need to see the bigger picture here. Megan needed help. We provided it. Now you need to accept it and move forward. Move forward? I repeated, incredulous. Do you honestly expect me to just find a new place to live and forget this ever happened? My mother brightened. Exactly. There's a lovely apartment complex near your office. Much shorter commute. We can help you look this weekend. They truly, genuinely believed they had done nothing wrong. In their minds, my property wasn't really mine. It was a family resource they could reallocate as they saw fit. They expected me to accept their decision without question, to give up my home without protest, and to continue the family pattern of sacrificing my needs for Megan's. I looked at the three of them, my father stern and authoritative, my mother smiling benignly, and Megan already back to scrolling through her phone, and realized further discussion was pointless. They weren't going to acknowledge the violation, the betrayal, or the illegality of what they'd done. "I have to go," I said quietly, pushing my chair back from the table. "But you've barely touched your pot roast," my mother protested. "I've lost my appetite." As I walked toward the door, my father called after me. "Don't do anything hasty, Arnold. Think about your sister's well-being." Without turning around, I replied, "I'm going to do exactly what you taught me growing up, Dad. I'm going to handle this like an adult." I drove straight to a hotel, checked in for a week, and then sat on the bed, staring at the wall, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "You'll feel better once you've had time to think. Family first." I turned off my phone and lay back on the unfamiliar bed. For the first time since discovering the situation, I allowed myself to fully feel the emotions washing over me. The shock, the betrayal, the deep sense of violation, and underneath it all, a slow-building resolve that this time, I wasn't going to acquiesce to my family's demands. That first night in the hotel was one of the longest of my life. Sleep came in restless bursts, interrupted by waves of disbelief and anger. Around 3 in the morning, I found myself sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through photos of my apartment on my phone, snapshots of the space I'd created, the home I'd built for myself, now effectively stolen from me. One photo particularly broke my heart. A picture of me sitting at my grandfather's desk by the window, working on my laptop, surrounded by his old books and records. Grandpa Arthur had been different from my parents. He saw me, really saw me, attended my chess tournaments, encouraged my interest in computers, and told me it was okay to forge my own path. When he left me those heirlooms, they became my most treasured possessions. Now they were in some storage unit, possibly damaged, certainly disrespected. As dawn broke, memories from childhood began filtering through my exhaustion. Megan's 8th birthday, when my parents canceled my science competition because it conflicted with her party. The time I made honor roll, and they barely acknowledged it, but threw a celebration when Megan got a C+ in math after failing the previous semester. My high school graduation, where they left early because Megan, a sophomore, had a minor role in a school play that evening. The pattern had continued into adulthood. When I bought my apartment, my mother's first response was, "It's a shame you have so much space just for yourself when Megan is struggling with her roommate situation." When I got promoted at work, my father immediately asked if my increased salary meant I could help Megan with her credit card debt. I had accepted their favoritism as an unchangeable fact of life. But this taking my home crossed a line I couldn't ignore. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became, not just at the act itself, but at the lifetime of being treated as less important, less deserving of consideration. Around 7, I finally turned my phone back on. Among the missed calls and texts from my parents was a message from my friend Derek. "Hey, welcome back. Dinner this weekend to hear about the trip?" I called him immediately, not caring about the early hour. When he answered, sounding sleepy, the whole story poured out of me in a jumbled rush. Whoa, slow down," he interrupted. "Are you saying your parents gave your apartment to your sister while you were away?" "Yes. They changed the locks, moved all my stuff to storage, and redecorated the entire place, and they actually expect me to just accept it and find somewhere else to live." There was a pause. Then Derek exploded. "What the actual hell? That's not just morally wrong. That's straight up illegal. They can't just take your property." His outrage was validating after my parents' gaslighting. "They seem to think that because we're family, normal rules don't apply." "That's insane," Derek said firmly. "You own that place. Your name is on the deed and mortgage, right? Not theirs?" "Completely in my name," I confirmed. "Then legally, they've committed breaking and entering, possibly theft, definitely unauthorized modifications to your property. Your sister is literally an illegal occupant." Hearing it stated so plainly solidified something in my mind. You're right. This isn't a family disagreement, it's a legal issue. "Damn straight it is," Derek agreed. "Listen, my cousin Catherine is a real estate attorney. Let me call her and see if she can meet with you today. This needs to be addressed immediately." After hanging up with Derek, I showered and tried to make myself presentable, despite having only the clothes I'd brought back from Europe. My phone buzzed with another text from my mother. "I'm making lasagna for dinner tonight. Come over and we can look at apartment listings together. Love you." The disconnect between her cheerful planning and the reality of what they'd done was staggering. I didn't respond. Around 10, I got a call from my coworker, Alicia. News of my return had reached the office grapevine. "Hey, welcome back. How was Europe?" I found myself unloading the situation on her as well. Unlike my parents' dismissal, or even Derek's righteous anger, Alicia's response was practical compassion. "That's horrible, Arnold. Listen, my spare bedroom is yours for as long as you need it. It's not much, but it's better than a hotel." Her offer brought tears to my eyes, the first kindness I'd encountered since returning. "Thank you. That means more than you know. Bring your stuff over tonight. We'll open a bottle of wine and figure out next steps." My stuff is apparently in a storage unit across town. I don't even have my clothes or toothbrush. Alicia didn't miss a beat. "Then we'll go to the storage unit first, grab what you need, and then hit Target for whatever's missing. I'll pick you up after work." That afternoon, Derek texted that his cousin Catherine could meet me the following morning. With that appointment set, I felt a small measure of control returning. After work, true to her word, Alicia drove me to Safekeep Storage on Rainier Avenue. The facility manager checked my ID and gave me access to Unit 17. When he rolled up the door, I felt physically ill. The space was haphazardly packed with my furniture and possessions. Boxes were stacked precariously, some already toppling. My carefully chosen living room furniture was crammed against the back wall. My mattress leaned on its side without any protection. Books had been dumped into bins rather than packed properly. Most distressingly, my grandfather's desk had been partially disassembled, its drawers removed and stacked separately, the beautiful wood surface scratched from rough handling. The vintage record collection was nowhere immediately visible. "They didn't even pack properly," Alicia observed, surveying the chaos. We spent 2 hours digging through the unit, trying to find essential items. Many things were damaged, picture frames broken, ceramics cracked, clothing wrinkled from being stuffed in bags rather than folded. My journal, which contained 5 years of personal reflections, was missing entirely, as was the box containing irreplaceable family photographs. The disregard for my possessions felt like a physical blow. These weren't just things, they were extensions of my life, my memories, my identity. Seeing them treated with such carelessness only reinforced the fundamental disrespect behind my family's actions. That night, settled into Alicia's guest room, with a suitcase of wrinkled clothes and a shopping bag of toiletries and necessities, I began researching tenant and property laws. The more I read, the clearer it became that my family's actions weren't just morally wrong, they were legally indefensible. Morning brought my meeting with Catherine Wilson, a sharp-eyed attorney with a no-nonsense manner that immediately put me at ease. In her downtown office, I laid out the entire situation, including my history with my family's favoritism. "Let me be absolutely clear," she said after listening carefully. "What your family did was unequivocally illegal. You own the property. Only you have the right to determine who lives there, who has access, and what modifications are made. They seem to think that because we're family, different rules apply." Catherine shook her head firmly. "The law doesn't make exceptions for family relationships. If anything, this makes the case more straightforward. They've admitted to the actions, so there's no dispute about facts. What are my options? We start with documentation," she explained, opening a notebook. "We need proof of your ownership, evidence of the unauthorized entry and modifications, and documentation of any damaged property." We spent the next hour creating a detailed plan. I would provide copies of my deed and mortgage statements, take photos of the current state of the apartment and the storage unit, and create an inventory of missing or damaged items. Once we have everything documented, we'll send a formal cease and desist letter demanding your sister vacate the premises immediately. If she refuses, we'll file for an official eviction notice through the courts. And my parents? Depending on the extent of the damage and missing items, we could pursue additional civil action against them for the costs of repairs, replacements, and your temporary housing. The thought of taking legal action against my own family felt surreal, but Catherine's matter-of-fact approach helped me see it for what it was: a necessary response to their actions, not an escalation or overreaction. "They're going to paint me as the villain," I said quietly, "the selfish son who wouldn't help his sister." Catherine's expression softened slightly. That's often the case in family disputes. But remember, you're not declining to help your sister. You're objecting to the way they chose to help her by violating your rights. You would have been willing to help on your own terms, which is reasonable and normal. As I left her office with a clear action plan, I felt something I hadn't since returning from vacation, a sense of purpose and rightness. This wasn't about being selfish. It was about establishing that I deserved basic respect and consideration, even from family. That evening, I drafted a formal email to my parents and Megan, explaining in clear, unemotional terms that I would be pursuing legal action to reclaim my property. I stated that Megan had 72 hours to voluntarily vacate the premises before formal eviction proceedings would begin. I ended by saying that I was disappointed it had come to this, but that their actions had left me no choice. After sending it, I turned off my phone again, knowing the bombardment that would follow. For the first time since discovering what had happened, I slept soundly, secure in the knowledge that I was standing up for myself in a way I should have done years ago. The response was swift and predictable. When I turned my phone back on the next morning, I had 17 missed calls, 28 text messages, and 5 voicemails, all from family members. My mother's texts ranged from confused. What do you mean legal action? We're family. To hurt after everything we've done for you. To angry. I can't believe you would threaten your own sister. My father's voicemails were stern lectures about family loyalty and veiled threats about consequences if I proceeded. Megan had sent a series of crying emojis, followed by accusations that I was trying to make her homeless out of spite. None of them acknowledged the fundamental issue that they had taken my property without permission. By mid-morning, the formal cease and desist letter had been delivered by courier to my apartment. Catherine had drafted it in appropriately serious legal language, outlining the unauthorized entry, illegal occupancy, property damage, and potential criminal and civil consequences if Megan did not vacate the premises within the specified time frame. An hour later, my mother called in tears. How could you send a lawyer's letter to your own sister? Do you know how upset she is? She's been crying all morning. How upset do you think I was when I came home to find my apartment stolen? I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Nobody stole anything. We were helping family redistribute resources where they were needed most. Mom, what you did was illegal. I own that apartment. Only I have the legal right to decide who lives there. Legal, 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 she cried. Since when do families operate on legal terms? We're blood. Being family doesn't give you the right to take my property. We raised you better than this, Arnold. What happened to the caring boy who always looked out for his sister? He grew into a man who expects basic respect for his boundaries. My father called next, his approach more threatening. You need to withdraw this ridiculous legal nonsense immediately, he demanded. Do you have any idea how this makes the family look? I'm not withdrawing anything. Megan needs to move out. And where is she supposed to go? He demanded. The same place I had to go when I found her living in my apartment. A hotel, an apartment, a friend's place. That's not my problem to solve. Not your problem? She's your sister. Yes, and I would have been happy to help her find a place, or even let her stay temporarily in my guest room while she looked. But that would have been my choice to make, not yours. This is about control, isn't it? You're upset because we made a decision without consulting your majesty first? This is about my legal property rights, Dad. And yes, about the basic respect of asking before taking something that belongs to me. His voice hardened. If you go through with this, there will be consequences to your relationship with this family. You created those consequences when you decided my home was yours to give away. The calls from extended family started that afternoon. Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, called to express her disappointment in my cruel treatment of Megan. Uncle Robert, my father's brother, threatened to cut me from his will if I didn't straighten up and remember family values. Cousins I barely spoke to sent messages questioning my character and accusing me of selfishness. It was clear my parents had mobilized the entire extended family with their version of events, conveniently omitting the part where they took my property without permission. By the next day, the pressure had expanded beyond family. My mother had apparently contacted several family friends, including my childhood piano teacher and my parents' neighbors, who reached out with concerned messages about how I was tearing the family apart. Most painfully, My mother had called my boss, whom she'd met at a company picnic the previous year, to express concern about my emotional state following my vacation. This led to an awkward conversation with my supervisor, who thankfully was more confused than concerned by my mother's call. The social pressure was exactly as I'd expected, yet still difficult to endure. Years of conditioning made me question whether I was overreacting, whether I should just give in for family peace. In moments of doubt, I reread Catherine's assessment of the situation, and reminded myself that my position was legally and morally sound. Meanwhile, the 72-hour deadline came and went, with no indication that Megan intended to move out. Catherine filed formal eviction papers with the court, and we were given a hearing date the following week faster than usual, due to the clear-cut nature of the unauthorized occupancy. 2 days before the hearing, I received an email from my father with the subject line settlement offer. Inside was a proposal that they would return my apartment in 6 months after Megan had time to find a suitable new place. In exchange, I would drop all legal proceedings and restore family harmony. There was no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, no offer to repair damages, and no recognition that the apartment was mine to begin with. Catherine advised me to reject the offer, but to use it as evidence that they recognized, on some level, that their position was untenable. They're starting to realize they have no legal standing, she noted. That's why they're trying to negotiate. On the day of the hearing, I arrived at the courthouse to find my entire immediate family waiting in the hallway. My mother rushed over as soon as she saw me. "Arnold, please. It's not too late to stop this madness," she pleaded, trying to take my hand. "We can talk this through as a family without involving courts and lawyers." We tried talking. "You dismissed my concerns and expected me to just accept what you did." My father approached, his expression a mixture of anger and something I hadn't seen before, uncertainty. "Your mother and I have discussed it, and we're willing to help Megan find a new place by the end of the month," he said stiffly. "But we need you to drop these proceedings immediately." "That's not how this works, Dad. The court will decide now." "You'd really let a judge rule on a family matter? Have you no sense of loyalty or privacy? You forfeited privacy when you illegally took over my home." Megan stood apart from our parents, arms crossed, eyes red from crying, but expression defiant. She hadn't spoken directly to me since that first night. Inside the courtroom, the case was called remarkably quickly. The judge, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses perched on her nose, reviewed the documents before her with a neutral expression. Catherine presented our case first, outlining the clear ownership of the property, the unauthorized entry and modifications, and the refusal to vacate despite formal notice. She presented copies of the deed, mortgage statements, photographs of the redecorated apartment, and an inventory of damaged items. My parents had hired an attorney of their own, a family friend named Martin Baker who specialized in corporate law, not property or tenant issues. His arguments were weak and somewhat confused, focusing primarily on family arrangements and an alleged verbal agreement that I would help Megan with housing, which had never existed. The judge interrupted him several times to redirect to relevant legal points. When he attempted to characterize the situation as a family misunderstanding, she cut him off sharply. "Counselor, whether the parties are related is immaterial to the question of property rights. The deed and mortgage are solely in Mr. Keaton's name. Did his parents or sister have written permission to enter, modify, or occupy the property? Well, Your Honor, in families, these permissions are often implicit." "That's a no." "Then," the judge stated flatly, "did they have keys provided by Mr. Keaton? They had access through." Another no. "Did Mr. Keaton ever indicate, in writing or verifiable communication, that his sister could take possession of his property?" "Your Honor, the family had discussions about helping." That's a third no. The judge removed her glasses. "Mr. Baker, I appreciate that family dynamics are complex, but property law is quite straightforward. Mr. Keaton owns the property. Only he has the legal right to determine who may enter or reside there." She turned to address my parents and Megan directly. "The court finds in favor of the plaintiff. Ms. Keaton is ordered to vacate the premises within 24 hours. Additionally, given the unauthorized modifications and documented damage to property, the defendants are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $6,800 to cover repairs, temporary housing costs, and legal fees." My mother gasped audibly. My father's face flushed red, with anger or embarrassment, possibly both. The judge continued, her tone slightly softened, but still authoritative. I strongly suggest the parties comply promptly with this ruling. Should Miss Keaton fail to vacate within the specified time frame, the court will authorize law enforcement to enforce the eviction, which would be an unfortunate escalation of an already regrettable situation. With that, she moved on to the next case, leaving my family sitting in stunned silence. In the hallway outside, my father attempted one last argument. This isn't over. We can appeal. Catherine, overhearing, stepped in smoothly. Mr. Keaton, the ruling was clear and legally sound. An appeal would be costly and almost certainly unsuccessful. Furthermore, failure to comply with the current order could result in additional penalties and potential criminal charges for illegal occupancy. I strongly advise you to focus on helping your daughter find new accommodations within the court's time frame. My mother, tears streaming down her face, looked at me with an expression of genuine betrayal. I can't believe you did this to your own family. I didn't do this, I replied quietly. You did, when you decided my home was yours to take. As they walked away, Megan turned back briefly, her expression a mixture of anger and something else, perhaps the first glimmer of recognition that actions have consequences, even when family is involved. Catherine placed a hand on my shoulder. That went exactly as expected from a legal perspective. Are you okay with how it unfolded? I watched my family's retreating forms. Yes, I said, surprised to find it was true. For the first time in my life, I set a boundary and held it. That feels right, even if it's difficult. The next morning, I received a text from Megan. I'll be out by 5. The sheriff doesn't need to come. It was the closest thing to compliance I'd seen since this began. At exactly 5 o'clock the following evening, I arrived at my apartment building with Catherine, a locksmith, and a sheriff's deputy. The deputy's presence had been Catherine's suggestion, a precaution to ensure the eviction proceeded smoothly if Megan was still there or if there was any resistance. As we approached my door, I noticed the floral welcome mat was gone. The locksmith hung back, ready to change the locks regardless of what we found inside. Catherine gave me an encouraging nod, and I knocked firmly. No answer. The deputy stepped forward. Miss Keaton? This is Deputy Rivera with the Sheriff's Department. I'm here to ensure compliance with the court-ordered eviction. Are you inside the premises? Silence. After following proper procedure with additional announcements, the deputy confirmed we could enter. I used the key Megan had left under the former welcome mat, as indicated in her text. Walking into my apartment felt surreal. The space was still filled with Megan's furniture and decorations, but there were signs of hasty packing, empty spots on shelves, open drawers, a half-empty closet visible through the bedroom door. On the kitchen counter sat my apartment key and a note written in Megan's handwriting. I took only what I paid for myself. Mom and Dad will contact you about the rest. The deputy completed a walkthrough, officially confirming Megan had vacated, then departed with a sympathetic nod. The locksmith immediately began changing the locks, while Catherine and I assessed the apartment's condition. The changes were even more extensive than I'd initially realized. Beyond the repainting and furniture replacement, they had changed light fixtures, installed different cabinet hardware in the kitchen, and replaced the bathroom vanity. In the second bedroom, holes had been drilled in the walls for shelving, and the closet had been modified with a custom organization system. Document everything, Catherine advised, taking photos with her phone. This goes well beyond normal wear and tear, or even basic redecorating. These are significant, unauthorized structural changes. I wandered through what had once been my sanctuary, feeling like a stranger in my own space. Even the air smelled different, some floral air freshener Megan had used instead of the subtle sandalwood scent I preferred. In the master bedroom, I discovered that the custom blinds I'd installed had been replaced with gauzy curtains, and the ceiling fan had been swapped for a small chandelier. The walk-in closet had been reconfigured with built-in shoe racks and jewelry organizers. They really committed to the renovation, I said, half to myself. It's like they truly believed I would never return to this place. Catherine finished her documentation and placed a hand on my shoulder. The good news is, you have your space back. The furniture can be removed, the walls repainted, the fixtures restored. The court-ordered restitution will help cover those costs. It's not just the physical changes, I explained. It's what they represent, the absolute disregard for this being my home, my sanctuary. She nodded, understanding. That's the hardest part of property violations. The emotional impact can't be fixed with paint or new fixtures. But reclaiming your space, making it yours again, can be healing. After the locksmith finished, providing me with new keys and security codes, Catherine left with promises to follow up on the restitution payment. I stood alone in what was legally mine, but no longer felt like home. That evening, my phone rang, my parents' home number. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. Hello? Arnold. My father's voice was tight, controlled. Your mother and I will be bringing a moving truck tomorrow to collect the furniture and items we purchased for Megan. We expect you to provide access as required by law. You can come between 9 and 11, I replied. I'll be here. But Dad, you should know the court order specifies that any permanent fixtures or modifications are now legally part of the property. That includes installed lighting, built-in shelving, and similar items. There was a pause, then a cold. Fine. We'll see you at 9. The line went dead. The next morning brought one of the most uncomfortable experiences of my life. My parents arrived precisely at 9, with a small moving truck and 3 men from a local moving company. My mother wouldn't look directly at me, and my father spoke only to give instructions to the movers. They efficiently removed the furniture, kitchenware, decorative items, and electronics they had purchased for Megan. The apartment became increasingly empty as they worked, leaving only the built-in modifications they couldn't legally take. As they prepared to leave, my mother finally broke her silence. Megan is staying with us for now, she said stiffly. In case you were concerned about your sister being homeless. I'm glad she has a place to stay, I replied sincerely. I never wanted her to be without housing. I just wanted my own home respected. You got what you wanted, my father said coldly. I hope it was worth destroying your family relationships. Before I could respond, they left, the moving truck pulling away with the material elements of their invasion, but leaving behind the emotional damage. Over the next 2 weeks, I focused on reclaiming my space. I retrieved my furniture and possessions from the storage unit, assessing what could be salvaged and what needed to be replaced. My grandfather's desk required professional restoration to repair the scratches and properly reassemble it. Many of my books were damaged from improper storage, and several irreplaceable items, including that journal and family photos, were never found. Friends rallied around me in ways I hadn't expected. Derek helped move the heavier furniture. Alicia assisted with organizing and unpacking. My colleague Jason, who had renovation experience, helped restore the bathroom to its original condition and repaint the garish teal walls back to my preferred slate blue. Slowly, the apartment began to feel like mine again. I replaced the chandelier with my ceiling fan, installed new blinds similar to my original ones, and returned my grandfather's desk to its rightful place by the window. Each change felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The court-ordered restitution arrived via certified check, exactly on the deadline set by the judge. There was no note, no acknowledgement, just the exact amount specified in the order. I used it to cover the restoration expenses, professional cleaning, and the hotel costs from those first disoriented days. A month after reclaiming my apartment, I received my first communication from Megan, a text message that read simply, I found a new apartment, moving in next week. No apology, no recognition of her role in what had happened, but at least information that she had stable housing. I responded with a simple, I'm glad to hear that, unsure if rebuilding that relationship was possible or even desirable at this point. My parents remained distant. My mother sent occasional texts about weather or neighborhood news, as if trying to establish a new normal without addressing what had happened. My father hadn't contacted me at all. Extended family had mostly retreated once the legal matter was settled, though occasional messages suggested I was still being discussed in family circles, likely not favorably. Despite the family fallout, I felt a growing sense of peace in my restored home. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I had set a clear boundary and maintained it despite enormous pressure. The apartment now represented not just a physical space I had worked hard to obtain, but a symbolic victory for my right to be respected, even by family. One evening, sitting at my grandfather's restored desk, looking out at the city lights, I realized something important. This painful experience had forced me to stand up for myself in ways I had avoided my entire life. In defending my property rights, I had also defended my worth as an individual deserving of basic consideration. As difficult as the confrontation had been, it felt like a necessary breaking point in unhealthy family dynamics that had persisted for decades. Whether those relationships could be rebuilt on healthier terms remained to be seen, but at least now, there was clarity about where the boundaries stood. The emotional aftermath of standing up to my family lingered long after my apartment was restored. There were moments, especially in the quiet evenings, when doubts crept in, had I overreacted? Was taking legal action too extreme? Should I have found another solution that preserved family harmony? These questions led me to start therapy with Dr. Marcus Bennett, who specialized in family dynamics and boundary issues. In our sessions, I began unpacking not just the apartment incident, but the lifetime of patterns that had preceded it. What you're describing is a common dynamic in families with favoritism, Dr. Bennett explained during one session. There's often a designated giver and a designated receiver. You were cast in the giver role early, expected to sacrifice for your sister without complaint. But taking legal action against my own family was proportional to the violation, he completed firmly. They didn't borrow your lawnmower without asking, they took your home, your sanctuary. The response needed to match the severity of the boundary crossing. Those conversations helped me see that my actions hadn't been excessive or vindictive, they had been necessary. For someone raised to prioritize family harmony above personal boundaries, this was a crucial realization. 6 weeks after reclaiming my apartment, I received an unexpected text from my younger cousin James, my Uncle Robert's son. Hey, can we grab coffee sometime? I want to talk about what happened with Aunt Diana and Uncle Harold. We met at a quiet cafe downtown. James, 24, and just starting his career in graphic design, had always been someone I enjoyed, but rarely saw outside of family gatherings. I wanted you to know that not everyone in the family thinks you were wrong, he said after we'd settled with our coffees. What they did to your apartment was messed up. If someone did that to my place, I'd have lost it. His support caught me off guard. Your dad threatened to cut me from his will over this. James rolled his eyes. Dad likes drama. He's already forgotten about that threat. But seriously, some of us younger cousins were talking, and we all agreed boundaries matter, even in family. Maybe especially in family. That conversation was the first indication that the extended family narrative wasn't unanimously against me. Over the following weeks, a few other relatives reached out with similar sentiments. My mother's cousin Patricia, who had experienced her own boundary struggles with the family, my Aunt Elaine, my father's sister, who had always maintained healthier limits than her brother. These connections reminded me that family wasn't monolithic. There were relationships worth preserving, people who respected boundaries and understood the importance of mutual respect. 3 months after the court hearing, my mother called. Unlike her recent texts about inconsequential topics, her voice was subdued. Your father and I have been doing some thinking, she began carefully, and some talking with our pastor. We may have overstepped with the apartment situation. It wasn't quite an apology, but from my mother, this admission was significant. Yes, you did, I replied. Not harshly, but not rushing to smooth things over either. We thought we were helping Megan, but we should have talked to you first. Pastor Williams helped us see that our intentions, however good, didn't justify how we went about it. Thank you for acknowledging that. There was a pause then. Would you consider coming for dinner next Sunday? Just to talk. Your father is. Well, he's still processing things, but he agrees we need to have a conversation. I agreed, with internal trepidation. The dinner was awkward. My father was indeed still stiff and formal, clearly uncomfortable with the implicit admission that he had been wrong. My mother tried too hard to create a sense of normalcy, as if we could simply move past what had happened without fully addressing it. But when she served dessert, my father finally spoke directly about the situation. I still think family should help family, he began, his tone defensive but less hostile than before. But Pastor Williams pointed out that help should be given willingly, not taken without asking. I should have called you about Megan's situation, instead of making decisions about your property. From my father, this was the equivalent of a profound apology. I nodded, acknowledging his words. I would have helped if you'd asked, I said. I could have offered Megan the guest room temporarily or helped her find a new place. I'm not against helping family. I'm against having my boundaries violated and my autonomy dismissed. My mother reached across the table to touch my hand. We've always been proud of how responsible you are, Arnold. Sometimes we took that for granted. And sometimes we leaned on it too heavily, my father added reluctantly. Expected you to always be the steady one while we focused on Megan's needs. It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a beginning. Over the following months, our relationship slowly rebuilt on somewhat different terms. There were still awkward moments and occasional slips into old patterns, but there was also a new awareness on both sides. My parents seemed more conscious of treating me with respect, and I became more confident in asserting my boundaries without guilt. Megan proved to be a more difficult reconnection. Her resentment lingered. Her texts remained terse and infrequent. 6 months after the incident, we met for coffee at her request. She looked well, more put together than I remembered, working now at a marketing firm and living in her own apartment. Mom and Dad are actually making me budget and pay my own rent, she said with a mixture of complaint and pride. They said it's time I learned financial responsibility. That's good, I replied. Being independent is important. She stirred her coffee for a long moment. I was really angry at you for a long time. I understand that, I said, though part of me wanted to point out the misplaced nature of her anger. But then I realized something weird. For the first time in my life, I'm actually okay on my own. Not relying on someone else to fix everything. She looked up. Don't get me wrong, I still think you could have handled things differently. But maybe it was time I stopped expecting rescue all the time. It wasn't an apology, but it was an acknowledgement of growth, perhaps the most I could hope for at this stage. Our relationship remained distant but civil, occasionally connecting for family events, but not seeking out deeper reconciliation yet. Time would tell if that would change. The most profound healing, though, came in my relationship with myself. Setting that boundary and holding it despite enormous pressure had shifted something fundamental in my self-perception. I began to recognize other areas of my life where I had allowed my boundaries to be crossed, at work and in friendships, and started addressing those with new confidence. When my boss attempted to assign me a project that would have required canceling a planned vacation, I calmly but firmly declined, suggesting an alternative solution that respected my time. When a friend repeatedly canceled plans last minute, I had an honest conversation about how it affected me rather than simply accommodating the behavior. These smaller boundary enforcements built on the foundation of that larger stand. Each time I advocated for myself, it became a little easier, a little more natural. The guilt that had always accompanied self-advocacy began to fade. 1 year after the apartment incident, I hosted a small dinner party in my fully restored home. Derek and his girlfriend, Alicia and her husband, my neighbor Travis, and a few other friends gathered in the space that had become, once again, truly mine. We celebrated not just my homecoming, but the journey of the past year. As I looked around at these people who had supported me without question, who had helped me move furniture and paint walls, and process emotions, I realized something important. Family isn't just about blood. It's about respect, reciprocity, and genuine care. My relationship with my parents and sister was slowly healing, taking new forms with clearer boundaries. But these friends had shown me what healthy connections truly looked like. Relationships where my needs mattered as much as theirs, where boundaries were respected as expressions of self-worth rather than rejected as selfishness. Sitting at the head of my dining table, in my rightfully reclaimed space, I offered a toast. To homes that are sanctuaries, to boundaries that are respected, and to the people who stand by us when we need to fight for what's ours. Later that evening, after everyone had left, I sat at my grandfather's desk, running my fingers over the restored wood. I remembered something he told me once, when I was 12 and struggling with always being expected to give in to Megan's demands. There's generosity that comes from strength, Arnold, and there's giving that comes from weakness. Know the difference, and never let anyone take what matters to you. It had taken 20 years, but I finally understood what he meant. True generosity comes from choice, the free decision to share what's yours. When sharing is coerced or taken without asking, it's not generosity, but exploitation. Standing up against that exploitation wasn't selfish. It was necessary self-respect. The apartment around me was more than just a physical space now. It represented a profound life lesson. that my boundaries deserved respect, that my needs mattered, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself, and ultimately for others, is to stand firm when those boundaries are crossed. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who crossed your boundaries? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary for healthy relationships. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. And share this video with someone who might need to be reminded that it's okay to stand up for themselves, even against family. Thank you for listening, and remember your space, your rules, your right to be respected.